So, today we're going to talk about something fascinating. It's a strategy that's trying to solve this massive global communication challenge. How do you get life changing information to literally billions of people who don't learn by reading books? This is all about ending what some are calling Bible poverty, which is just the lack of access to scripture in a way people can actually understand and use. Okay, so let me ask you something a little provocative. For a lot of us, knowledge, truth, it all comes from the written word. But what if for most of the world, that's just not how it works? What if the best way to share something truly important had absolutely nothing to do with a printed page? You see, it all comes down to a really fundamental difference in how we're wired to learn. In literate cultures, like many of ours, we tend to process things on our own, by reading. But in oral cultures, and we're talking about billions of people here, learning is a group activity. It's communal. It happens when you hear stories, proverbs, and songs. Information isn't just static ink on a page. It's alive, it's dynamic, and it gets passed down through relationships. And that, right there, creates a huge communication gap. And that brings us right to the heart of the problem, the world's literacy gap. The overwhelming majority of people who still don't have the Bible in their language come from these oral cultures, where just handing someone a book, well, it's not going to have much of an impact. And there's this really powerful idea that the very success we've had with traditional text-based translation has completely by accident left behind this massive part of the world's population. It's like we built these incredible superhighways for literate societies, but totally missed the people who don't have on-ramps. Okay, so how do you even begin to bridge a gap that big? Well, it takes a totally new game plan. You need something of an off-road strategy, one that's built for a completely different kind of terrain. And that's where this comes in. It's called the Disciple-Making Oral Bible Strategy, or DOBS for short. Now, I want to be clear, this is way more than just, an audiobook. It's a whole system, and it uses what we know about adult learning and even brain science to empower a community to translate scripture for themselves, orally, in a way that actually leads to real, lasting transformation. I love this analogy because it just clicks. Think about traditional written translation like a high-speed train. It's incredibly powerful, super efficient, but it can only go where the tracks, which is literacy, have already been laid down. DOBS, on the other hand, is like a whole fleet of rugged, all-terrain off-road vehicles. It doesn't need any tracks. It can go anywhere, navigating the landscape of oral cultures to get the message right where it needs to be. All right, so how does this whole off-road vehicle thing actually work? What's under the hood? Well, the whole system is actually designed around the way our brains are naturally built to process and hold on to information, especially when it comes in the form of a story. It's all built around this really simple but powerful learning cycle: head, heart, and hand. First comes the head. Everyone listens to a story over and over to really get the facts straight. Then you move to the heart. You talk about the characters, what they were feeling, and you build this real emotional connection. And finally, you get to the hand. You figure out together how this story applies to your own life. It leads to actual change. This way, the story isn't just memorized, it's truly learned and lived. Okay, but wait a minute. How do you make sure it's accurate? That's a huge question. The system has this built-in community-driven quality check called the cycle of correction. A draft goes through checks for simple meaning, then for critical details like grammar and cultural fit, and finally to make sure it just sounds right, that it speaks the community's heart language. And the crucial part? It's all done by the community themselves. And this is a really, really key shift in thinking. The goal here isn't to create a physical product. The source material calls them bodega Bibles, books that just end up sitting in a warehouse somewhere. No, success is measured by spiritual transformation. They even have a tool to track how the community is actually changing, from the very first spark of interest all the way to creating whole new communities of faith. All right, this all sounds amazing in theory, right? But does it actually work in the real world? Well, let's take a look at a really powerful example of this transformation happening with the Pokot people over in Kenya. So we're heading over to East Africa. This is the home of the Pokots, and their story just perfectly illustrates why this oral strategy is such a game changer. So the Pokot people are nomadic herders. I mean, they're constantly on the move with their animals, and their culture is completely oral. A book-based strategy would be a total non-starter here. But after a few Pokot pastors went to a DOBS workshop, they went back home and just started translating. They didn't need printing presses. They used these little handheld speakers to share the audio scriptures with their people, usually just gathered together under a tree. And what happened next is just incredible. The speed is mind-blowing. The The work began in 2022. By the very next year, 2023, new communities of faith were just popping up all on their own. And get this, by early 2024, just 2 years later, they had finished translating the entire New Testament orally. That kind of pace is it's unheard of in traditional translation work. And that right there shows you the power of what they call intrinsic motivation. This isn't something being done to a community from the outside, it's something being done by them, for them. When people take ownership of bringing these stories into their own heart language, they are the ones who drive the work forward with this incredible passion and speed. Now, the Pokot story is amazing, but it's just one part of a much bigger global vision. This whole strategy is seen as a critical piece of the puzzle for reaching a pretty historic goal.
So why 2033? Well, that year is a huge milestone. It marks the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection and Pentecost, and major Christian networks all around the world are looking at that date as this big target for a decade of really focused effort to share their faith.
So what this all boils down to is a fundamental shift, a total change in the center of gravity. For a long, long time, this kind of work was led by the West. This oral strategy is part of a massive movement to empower the global South, the oral majority in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, to take the lead and finish the work themselves. It's about recognizing that being an oral learner isn't a deficit. It's just a different and incredibly powerful way of understanding and living. And that really leaves us with this final, powerful question to think about. When a story is no longer some foreign text on a page, but a living, breathing narrative that's spoken in a community's own voice, owned by its people, and passed down to their children, does it become something more than just words? Does it become a part of who they are? That right there is the transformation this is all about.